The war in Gaza does not seem to have any light at the end of the tunnel. So where does that leave us as we are in 2025 now, 2 years removed from the beginning of the Israeli occupation? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So if you want to learn how to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode. But first, the war in Gaza. It has been going on now for well over 2 years. Are we getting towards the end of this occupation? There's been a lot of hardship, especially right now we're seeing with a lot of claims of starvation as at the behest of the Israeli government to these Palestinians that are in the Gaza Strip. Is that true? Or is it just propaganda? I've heard that as well. So we need to dig past the noise, and returning here to the Brian Nichols Show is Abdullah Hayek. Abdullah, welcome back to the show, my friend. How you doing?
Good, Brian. It's great to be here again, and a lot has been happening, and I hope to tackle it all down with you.
Absolutely, my friend. Yeah, and before we dig into the topics of conversation, just to recap, you were back on the show a few months ago, and we were kind of digging into what's going on here, right, with the American occupations over, or at the very least, the American-led interventions over in the Middle East, and kind of talking more of a PR standpoint of where the American public was. But for today, I want to take much more of a just fact-finding mission, right, boots on the ground, what we're seeing happen over in the Gaza Strip, and frankly, like, what's true, what's not, what's fact, what's fiction, what's actually, real, and what's propaganda. So before we do that, Abdullah, just for the folks who are joining us here, maybe for the first time after episode 1000, let us know who you are and a little bit more of your focus and priorities in the foreign policy space.
Well, first of all, congratulations on your 1000th episode. Glad to be
Thanks, man.
I'm a Middle East analyst and consultant based in Washington, D.C., and I'm a Middle East History and Peace Fellow with Young Voices. And I love getting on shows like Brian's, so I'm happy to be here.
We love having you on the show, Abdullah. So let's do this. Dig into where we are, right? And how about this? For the folks who maybe they're playing along in the home game, they've never really spent the time, energy, and effort to dig into the what is happening over in Gaza. They see the headlines. They see these college protests, right? They've heard the narratives. They've heard folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, congresswoman from Georgia, saying she's I think the first sitting Republican congresswoman calling what we're seeing in the Gaza Strip an actual genocide. You have other folks on the right, like the Ben Shapiros, who are saying go, go, go. So like I mean, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of talking heads, but it's really hard to differentiate what's fact, what's fiction, what's a narrative, what's the truth. So just kind of help lay like the groundwork here for us. Like, let's go back to maybe even before, Abdullah, before October 7th. Like, how did we get to the point where this became such a heated conflict? And I mean, we don't have to go back to biblical times. You can, though, if you want to start there. But just kind of help lay out the foundation, and then you can carry that into where we are today and some of the atrocities, or are they atrocities, taking place over the Gaza Strip. So where do you want to start?
I'll start with the dawn of World War I.
With the Balfour Declaration?
With the Balfour Declaration, with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, with the flow of Jewish migrants from mainly Europe into what was then Palestine. Year by year, from 1918 all the way till today, year by year, the constant flow and change of demographics in that region created a lot of tension and eventually hostilities in the 30s until, World War II erupted. And then when the British and the French and the Allies were occupied with fighting the Nazis in Germany and in Europe, the situation with the colonies, with the mandates, with the overseas territories of those empires became gradually deprioritized. So by the end of World War II, the hostilities that erupted in what was then mandatory Palestine had reached a climax. And the British were pretty much fed up with it. And they decided to hand over that issue to the newly created United Nations. Now, prior to the United Nations, there have been several partition plans to, divide and separate the territory between the local Palestinian Arabs and the Jews, who mostly, if not entirely, came from outside what is now Palestine. Now, with the Jewish influx, creating sort of a competitive edge over the Palestinian Arabs, especially with foreign support, with foreign armaments, foreign advising, they managed to, influence Europe to support the partition plan in the UN in 1947. Of course, there was a Palestinian state to be proposed and an Israeli state to be proposed. The Arabs refused, the Jews accepted, and the war in 1948 erupted. In 1948, the state of Israel, as we know today, survived, and what is now today the West Bank and East Jerusalem went to Jordan, and the Gaza Strip went to Egypt's hands. Now, from 1948 to 1967, that was the status quo. In 1967, the Six-Day War erupted. When the Six-Day War erupted, Israel nearly tripled in size, taking from Egypt the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. From Jordan, it took Jerusalem and the West Bank. And from Syria, it took the Golan Heights. Now, obviously, the Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt in 1978. But Anwar Sadat, the then president of Egypt, did not want to take back the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip remained under Israeli occupation up until 2005, when Ariel Sharon, the then prime minister, disengaged from the Strip. He did not support the creation of a Palestinian state in the Strip. He did not remove the blockade by land, air, and sea into the Strip. So essentially, the Strip had remained occupied, but not physically occupied. It was surrounded, it was blockaded, water was scarce, electricity was scarce, freedom of movement and travel was pretty much non-existent. The situation from 2005 up until today had reached, day by day, a deteriorating situation for the living lives of ordinary Gazans. And it is also important to note that the Gaza Strip, 80% of Gazans aren't actually local Gazans. 80% of Gazans are actually refugees from the remainder of the mandatory Palestine. They came from Jerusalem, they came from Ramleh, they came from Safed, from Beersheba, from Jaffa, from all over the former mandatory Palestine. And 80% of Gazans today are actually from the rest of the region. So that constantly created a situation where we see, broken dreams, broken hearts, especially with the peace movement between the PLO, which is dominated by the Fatah party, and they led the process on the peace front with Israel, with the 1993 Oslo Accords, with the 2000 Camp David negotiations. And Hamas saw this as constantly being sidelined and, put to the shelf and not being included in what is going to be the determination and the conclusion for what is a Palestinian, for what is a Palestinian state, for what is going to encompass our borders, our territory, our national identity. And Hamas grew in the shadows. Within the past 2 decades, it managed to establish itself as a proxy for Iran. It received support, it received funding, it received training. Hamas leaders frequently met with not just Iranian leaders, but broader axis of resistant leaders. And that eventually led to October 7th, as we saw, where Hamas broke from the Strip and went into Israel. And what happened after that is horrendous. The Israeli retaliation, based on the IDF mentality of an eye for an eyelash, has resulted in a much larger catastrophe than October 7th, in my opinion. We have the recorded number right now is 60,000 Palestinians dead. The UN is warning of an impending famine. Since May till today, we have almost 2,000 Palestinians killed by just trying to reach aid trucks.
You've spent your whole life building something meaningful, a career, a family, a legacy. But none of that matters if your health can't keep up. And the truth is, as we age, our body's natural production of nitric oxide, which is vital for circulation and heart function, declines sharply. And that drop increases your risk for high blood pressure, poor oxygen flow, and even cognitive decline. You don't feel like yourself, and no doctor seems to have an answer that doesn't involve more prescription medication. And that's why I recommend Cardio Miracle, because it's an all-in-one blend of nitric oxide boosters like L-arginine, L-citrulline, organic beets, and more that support your cardiovascular system, brain function, and your immune response. It's not about reversing time, it's about giving your body what it needs to keep showing up strong. You've worked too hard to feel like you're fading. So, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, click the link in the show notes, or go to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS and get back in control of your health. And look for the little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols on the Cardio Miracle homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
And we have recorded testimonies of people that were on the ground, such as Aguilar and his interview with Tucker Carlson. I think it was very moving. It was horrendous to hear what happened there. And it's time for the war to end. I think that the cup has reached its full capacity. What more is there to achieve? So a lot to tackle, a lot to talk about, and
this is really good, Abdullah. And the reason I wanted you to give this context and kind of this history, right? Because I see a lot of the arguments that are raised up in contemporary discussions that are based more on whatever the last thing was, right? And there is a very, I'm not going to say deliberate, but I do feel at times it is willfully ignored the historical pieces that have come together here. And I'm sure that, for the audience listening today, there are things that you just talked about that they had no idea, right? They probably had no idea about the 80% of Palestinians who were not native to that area, but rather were just kind of forced in there. And going forward to the last piece you raised, this is the humanitarian piece where I think lots of folks are very much starting to get more and more frustrated with what's been continuing since this occupation of Gaza has taken place, because what was the number? 60,000 civilians potentially, killed. And I hear people like Ben Shapiro who will make arguments saying, well, we can't trust that number because that's the Gazan, that's the Palestinian provided number. We can't confirm that. And even if they do go into saying, well, we'll give any credence, there's the argument they make saying, well, we're this is the most, what's it, civilian to military death ratio. This is one of the best, military occupations that we've ever seen. And just to see the same people, and like I'm going to generalize for this piece, but like the same people, like the Ben Shapiros of the world, who will make moral arguments based on pro-life arguments for abortion, then justifying and rationalizing killing of literal children and civilians in Gaza from the Israeli army, mind you, right? And then saying, no, that's not Israel's fault. That's the Palestinians' fault. That's Hamas's fault. And every death is Hamas's fault. It just feels like a very backwards type of way of looking at this. And it really just seems not so much a means to an end, but an ends to a means. And that's where I'm getting, I've been very, very frustrated with what we've seen over the past 2 years. And by the way, folks, like, peek behind the curtain to show you how very controversial this topic has gotten. My marketing girl, she and I were having our marketing sync up here a couple of weeks ago. And she'd even mentioned that there are like these big podcast or radio companies that if you're trying to do interviews with folks from their organizations or trying to get you on there, they actually ask now like what your stance is on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And that for me was like, guys, what? This show, I have not taken any strong arguments. Like, I'm not Dave Smith on here. I'm not going out and debating folks, on the Israel Gaza, Palestinian conflict. I'm not going and on Joe Rogan and debating what's his name, Douglas Murray, and having him go, "Have you been to Israel?" Right? Like, I'm not that guy. But the fact that I'm seeing that come into our world is very eye-opening, and it makes more and more of your average person say, "Hold up, what? What's going on here? Why is my upstate New York congresswoman, who I used to live in northern New York, Elise Stefanik, right? Why is she prioritizing anti-Semitism on college campuses as her number one issue when I know for a fact that the 21st congressional district up in New York is one of the most impoverished congressional districts in the entirety of New York State? Like, sorry, in terms of prioritization of issues, I think that's more of a big blinking red light than talking about potential anti-Semitism on campus. And yet, Abdullah, this topic, right, anti-Semitism on campus, if you even question, this isn't a Jewish question. This is, if you're questioning the government of Israel, right? If you question the government of Israel, that you are labeled anti-Semitic, right? And that's where a lot of folks are saying, time out. No. I can question any government out there, and that doesn't make me anti, anything. I can question our government here in America. And by the way, we have both on the red team and the blue team. And that doesn't make me anti-American. It doesn't make me, like whatever the same, we don't have a religion here of Americans, right? But like, if it was a predominantly, Christian ethos, which it should be, but a different conversation for a different day. But like, questioning the American government doesn't make you anti-Christian, right? It makes you anti-American government actions. Like, I think we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So I say all that, Abdullah, like, this is why so many folks, especially in the Gen Z camp and the younger millennial camp, it's not that they're pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas, but they are against what the Israeli government is doing and the mental gymnastics that are being played in order to justify and to confidently state we can do these horrible acts because, well, relative to other horrible acts, it's not that bad. That's where I'm at right now. What does this turn into? And I guess, how about this? Before we go to what does this turn into, what are your thoughts on kind of my summarization there? Am I on track? Do you have some disagreements? Hit me with it.
Oh, you're on track, Brian. The turn of the tide is in front of us. We're seeing a change in stance towards Israel as a whole, not just on the public level on the ground. We're seeing it from government level, from influential voices, from people that actually have the say to make a change. You mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene, the proposal to eliminate over $500 million of aid to Israel. We have Thomas Macy, who is very active on social media and in his words against funding Israel. We also have, Donald Trump. Donald Trump's friction with Netanyahu over the past few months has to be noted. I think that, the relationship that was in the first term between Trump and Netanyahu is definitely not present right now. And it results to the lack of coordination, lack of communication between the American grand strategy and that of Israel, with striking Damascus right in the heart of it when there's actually negotiations for peace sponsored by the United States between Israel and Syria, something that Trump wants to expand on. Trump came to be a peacemaker, not to become a war maker. And Netanyahu did that. Obviously, during the ceasefire agreements between Iran and Israel, when there was a 12-hour timeline to implement the ceasefire, Israel went ahead and, according to Donald Trump's words, dropped all that you have on them in the first 12 hours. So that's on the presidential level. But we also have, many people, both current and former government officials. We have Matt Gaetz on One American News Network, who was actually very harsh in his words about Israeli Jewish settlers in the West Bank who've killed a Palestinian American citizen in the West Bank. And these incidents are occurring. There was one just 2 days ago. And of course, we have people that are in the media, influential voices, people like Dave Smith, Candace Owens, Dan Bilzerian, people that people listen to a lot, and they're giving content that reflects a growing and violent, harsh stance towards Israel. that surprisingly wasn't there a few years ago. These guys were pro-Israel supporters. They were very strong, self-proclaimed Zionists. So what changed? I think what changed is two things regarding Israel. First of all, its conduct in Gaza. Anyone in the right mind would definitely not, even think for a second that what Israel is doing in Gaza is right. You don't 1,200 to 1,400 people dead on October 7th do not equal 60,000 people dead in Gaza. What happened on October 7th, and I'm telling you this as a Muslim American, as an Arab American, what happened on October 7th was horrendous. But what's happening in Gaza right now is even beyond the metric of horrendous. It is beyond the metric of evil. What is happening right now, you can't justify this. There is literally no moral explanation to justify this. And it has changed the tide. It is coming back to bite Israel back in the hindquarters. And it is going to affect them on the long term. Israel right now depends heavily, if not entirely, on American taxpayer dollars. If Israel cuts that off, because it's already, we can pretty much, it's safe to say that Israel has alienated the left, with a few exceptions at the top level figures. It's almost going to alienate the right. It's creating an avalanche. It is going to reach the right. We have a lot of social media accounts and posts that speak in a very strong, conservative, libertarian, pro-American voice that are not without Israel. They're anti-Israel. This is a precedent that we've never seen before. And I think, the war needs to end. How does it end? There has to be immense pressure on the Israelis to right now. The first step that has to be right now, before the hostages, before everything, given the humanitarian aid to the civilians. Because Israel came into the Gaza Strip under two objectives: to release the hostages and to eliminate Hamas. Obviously, Israel's military tactics and conduct in the Gaza Strip right now do not reflect those two objectives. The war has become on civilians. The civilians are taking the hit. We've heard this, this comparison by I don't know how many figures politically or on the media level. If someone's taking a couple of hostages during a bank robbery, or there's a school shooting and the shooter's taking the kids hostage, you don't go in and you kill the whole bank or you kill the whole school, right?
Right.
So obviously we need to let in that humanitarian corridor that is extremely, extremely important to do right away. And then we can pressure Hamas on releasing the hostages and, de-alienating itself from the leadership cycle and passing it on to the Palestinian Authority that is already weak beyond description. And, the Arabs are doing what they can. Just, I think a week ago, the Arab League unanimously said that Hamas has to disarm itself and present itself by, putting that motion of transferring power in the Strip back to the Palestinian Authority. So the Arabs are doing what they can, but obviously they can't have troops on the ground in Gaza to pressure Hamas. Israel is doing that, but obviously the tactics of the Israeli military aren't reflecting that it is in the Strip to go after Hamas, unfortunately. So a lot has happened. It is pretty much exhausting for everyone, especially that we have Ukraine and we have a lot of other things. And, internationally, there's just so much going on that people just get exhausted with this. I mean, even on Truth Social with Trump's posts, the one with Medvedev and Russia and moving 2 submarines, and then you have the casualty lists in Ukraine and Russia. A lot of death is happening around, and that's where we, follow up on our previous conversation on what can America provide to the world. And we agreed that, what America should provide is not the constant flow of American taxpayer dollars, it's American diplomacy. And on that front, I commend Donald Trump on what he's doing. The American diplomatic model, which is successful so far, has resulted in peace between India and Pakistan, between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We had a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. There was a negotiations phase going on between Israel and Syria. There's a lot of going on. The ball is rolling. We can expand on that and we can accelerate it, more pedal to the metal. But, Israel is just not doing the necessary stuff that helps that ball keep on rolling. You're not going to starve 2 million people, 2.2 million people. You're not going to starve them for 50 hostages. Okay, that's just not an equation that works. And unfortunately, we hear voices, just like you mentioned, like Ben Shapiro and all of these clowns that say, "Oh, release the hostages, then we'll let the food in." You know, it went to an extent that is so horrible that people like Randy Fine, a congressman from Florida, alienated AIPAC and the American Jewish Coalition. It went to that extent. So these voices are just not just unnecessary and unhealthy, but how does a constituent in Randy Fine's congressional district feel like when Randy Fine says, "The whole purpose I came to Congress is that I can serve Israel"? What the hell does that mean? Didn't Randy Fine come to attend to the constituents of his Florida congressional district? Did he come for solely foreign policy? He can serve on a foreign policy related committee in Congress. Sure, everyone does that. But your sole purpose in Congress is not to serve Israel, Mr. Fine.
Does it feel like your office has quietly turned into a mini call center? I mean, you didn't plan for it, but between the customer service calls, the sales follow-ups, and team check-ins, the phones are ringing nonstop. And you're stuck managing it all with a setup built for 2012. And that's what I call the accidental contact center. And it's more common than you think. Level 365 makes it easy for you to level up. You'll get call routing, full call history, real analytics without buying some massive contact center platform. It's plug-and-play simplicity for businesses that suddenly found themselves taking way more calls than expected. If that sounds like you should check out Level 365.
Abdullah, I want to dig more into these these numbers here of support, because you're hitting on something that is, it is absolutely the reality, right? And this is, I think, if we go towards the tail end of the episode today, one of my favorite podcasts is the PBD podcast, and Tom Ellsworth on the show, he always says, words talk, but numbers scream, right? Here's some screaming numbers. Republicans under 50 are now split on Israel. As of 2025, only 48% of Republicans under the age of 50 have a positive view of Israel. Down, now this is from only 3 years of difference, right? That number in 2022 was 63%. So now we're down to 48% now. And then also 50% now view Israel negatively. So not only is there only 48% of young Republicans under the age of 50 who support Israel, the higher number is now disapproval of Israel. And just for comparison, only 23% of Republicans aged 50 and over views Israel negatively. So it's a huge generational difference. But let's even take this further, right? Let's look at young evangelicals. Support for Israel amongst young evangelicals. In 2018, that number was 75%. In 2021, that number was 34%. And we haven't gotten any new numbers from that. And by the way, these numbers are all from the Pew Research, from the Brookings Institute, from Gallup, from The Hill. So we have a variety of polls we're pulling from here. Majority of young Americans also oppose current military occupation. In a recent Gallup poll, only 9% of Americans under the age of 35 approve of Israel's military actions, and only 6% viewed Prime Minister Netanyahu positively, which speaks to maybe why he was going on that Gen Z podcast, trying to get in front of this big issue. America first and fiscal concerns. When you look at Gen Z, they want to prioritize domestic stability, right? Which, to your point, Randy Fine, he's talking about dropping bombs over in Gaza. I bet Israel could just drop him from an airplane, and the size of him, he'd cause a nice big crater. But broader context, and by the way, he's morbidly obese, folks. That was the joke there. And just overall U.S. sympathy, right? Public sympathy towards Israel across the board is at its lowest point in 25 years of Gallup tracking, with only 46% of the entire American voting base sympathetic. And for younger Americans, that number is even lower. So what does this mean, right? And this, Abdullah, is where I think, as we are looking as what comes next, and this actually is piggybacking on a conversation I'm going to have here with Ethan Watson, because we're talking about, like, where's the younger generation going? But man, I feel that the older, more truly pro-Zionist folks, they, pardon the crass expression here, folks, but they blew their load way too early, right? They are now at a point where not only did they try to go too hard, too fast, but they did so at the sacrificing of support from the younger generation, which, by the way, if they want to continue this march towards whatever they're trying to do out in the Middle East, you need that younger voting base support. You have folks like Charlie Kirk who are now starting to tuck tail and run and not even talking about Israel or the Palestinian conflict. They're not even bringing it up anymore because they see how the younger voters are so against this. And then go to one of the biggest organizations there for young voters, that is Charlie Kirk's baby, Turning Point USA. They had their big conference a few weeks ago. You have folks like Tucker Carlson on stage calling out Israel by name and getting rounds of thunderous applause. You have Dave Smith debating Josh Hammer, and Dave Smith getting infinitely more support in that debate than Josh Hammer was, both from the live audience and the audience watching at home. And listen, I'm not one of those like go to the comments guy, but like go to the comments and you can see the discrepancy between the folks who are saying, yeah, this is insanity, and the folks who are promoting the actual like Israel occupation. And I just think, going back to they blew their load too early. Like you fast forward 15 years, right, Abdullah? The voting base of the boomers, the Randy Fines of the world, right? They're not going to be here, or they're going to be in significantly smaller numbers. And what does that mean? It means that the larger voting base of young Americans are going to be the ones actually calling the shots. And I can guarantee if things continue at this pace, they're not going to be supporting Israel. They're not going to be supporting the occupation in Gaza. They're not going to be supporting this, just because it's Israel, our best friend, our democracy out in the Middle East, that at least they have Christians there. Like that argument isn't holding enough water anymore. There has to be something different. And again, I think if they keep down this path, it's going to be a path towards self-destruction. But that's my final thoughts for today. Abdullah, bring us home. What do you want the audience to take away from today's episode, from our overarching conversation? Like, what are the vibes? What are your thoughts? Hit us with it.
I think as an American, people should think to America first. And America first doesn't mean just tending to the domestic needs and priorities at home, infrastructure, voting, education. Those definitely come as a priority. But America's image abroad is a definite priority as well. What will we tell the future generations to come? That what did the American viewpoint and priority and interest and standpoint on international issues be? What is going to be said to children, American children, when they see, conversations like what we're having and what we're seeing online about Gaza, yet something never happened. No efforts were done to end that. Where was America when it was needed? Where was the American diplomacy fueled and accelerated to end that bloodshed, to end that conflict, and to bring people together and bring peace? Situations like this, especially from an American standpoint, have to be a mediating, a peace promoting, a violent ending position. We're not seeing that. I hate to say this, but the United States is complicit in what's happening in Gaza. How horrible it is to say that. It is immensely horrible. Where I pray to God, Donald Trump right now realizes that if he manages to end the Gaza and move forward with that process to literally end the conflict as a whole, he will be commemorated as a titan in the region by the rest of the region. Why wouldn't he want to do that? Why wouldn't he want to bring victory as the American president, as the leader of the free world, as the most powerful man in the world, to a victory to a whole region? And it will not benefit just Palestinians, it will benefit Israelis. Israelis really, if we really could look back in time, the safest the average Israeli citizen was during the peace process negotiations phase of the late 90s to the early 2000s. You know why that stopped? Because Benjamin Netanyahu came back into office. Because the negotiations stopped. And he managed to turn the American viewpoint into supporting him militarily to tackle Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the PMF and Syria. We keep opening fronts and we keep closing doors, whether we should build bridges and open doors. That's the American standpoint. I think we need to realize that on the scale of life, peace weighs much better than war and death. So I pray that the American viewpoint changes And I'm happy to see people like you who have actually realized the truth, who realized that it's the honorable thing to speak the truth. And I hope that expands and ends the conflict. So thank you to all the liberty lovers that were with us today. And I hope to see you soon, Brian.
Absolutely, Abdullah. No, this has been a great conversation. And I mean, again, open door policy for you come on the show. We always have great chats here. So, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, please do me a favor. Go ahead, give it a share when you do. Tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me over on Twitter, X, or on Instagram and Facebook. And if you want to go ahead and catch the show when it premieres live, we live stream our shows on Mondays, Thursdays, over on X and over on Facebook. Make sure you hit the little notification bell so you don't miss a single time we have a brand new episode go live. And as for the Brian Nichols Show, yes, Monday, Thursday, Friday is our release schedule. So Mondays, we do our Wellness Fix episode, talking all wellness episodes and focus on health and wellness. On our Friday episodes, we do our business entrepreneurship focus, which is called the Sales to Success Show. And then, of course, every Thursday, both on the Brian Nichols Show platform as well as Lions of Liberty. You can catch our conversations just like we did today. One more time over at briannicholsshow.com or Lions of Liberty. Abdullah, where can folks go ahead and reach out to you if they want to continue the conversation after today's episode?
You know, I can be followed on X, Twitter at ahayek99, and I'm sure on my bio profile URL at Brian's show, my contact information can be there.
Perfect. All right, folks. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and put a pin in today's conversation. One more time, if you got some value, go ahead and give today's episode a share. But with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Abdullah Hayek.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.